"Ma'am, you need to leave." The words cracked across the marble lobby so sharply that several people turned before they even realized why. Zariah Brooks stopped walking. The glass doors behind her whispered shut, sealing out the chilly Manhattan morning, while sunlight spilled through the 40-foot windows and stretched across the polished floor like liquid gold. She stood quietly, one hand resting on the strap of a worn leather tote, her dark navy coat still carrying traces of the cool October air. Across the reception desk, Madison Pierce lifted her chin and forced a professional smile that somehow felt colder than an ice storm. "This area is reserved for scheduled executive meetings," she said, her voice loud enough for nearby visitors to hear. "If you're looking for community assistance programs, there are organizations a few blocks south." A few people glanced up from their phones. Others exchanged awkward looks. Zariah blinked once. "I have a meeting here," she replied calmly. Madison's fingers tapped her keyboard without actually checking anything. "I'm sure you think you do." The comment drew a quiet chuckle from a man waiting near the elevators. Zariah's expression never changed. The lobby seemed to grow even quieter as the giant digital display behind the desk cycled through images of Whitaker Holdings' newest billion-dollar developments. Madison folded her arms. "Ma'am, I'm trying to help you avoid embarrassment." Zariah looked around the room. The polished stone, the hanging glass sculpture, the executives rushing past with coffee cups and designer briefcases. Then she simply nodded. "I understand." Somehow that answer irritated Madison more than an argument would have. What nobody in the lobby knew was that within minutes, panic would spread across the 42-story building. An executive assistant would nearly drop her tablet. A conference room filled with senior leadership would fall silent. And one of the most powerful CEOs in New York would leave a meeting worth hundreds of millions of dollars and sprint toward the elevators. Because the woman standing quietly in front of the reception desk was the one person he absolutely could not afford to lose. But no one knew that yet. Not Madison. Not the security officers watching from across the lobby. Not even the visitors staring curiously from the leather seating area. They only saw a black woman in a simple coat being told she didn't belong. If stories about courage, justice, and unexpected truths mean something to you, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from today. Because what happened next would become the most talked about moment in Whitaker Holdings history. And it all started 30 minutes earlier, when Zariah Brooks stepped out of a yellow cab 3 blocks away and looked up at the shining tower that had no idea who was about to walk through its front doors. 30 minutes earlier, the city had been waking beneath a pale gray sky when Zariah Brooks stepped out of a yellow cab on Madison Avenue and looked up at the tower rising above her. The building seemed to disappear into the clouds, its glass exterior reflecting streaks of morning light across neighboring skyscrapers. People rushed past carrying coffee cups, messenger bags, and the invisible weight of another workday. Zariah remained still for a moment, not because she was intimidated, but because she remembered a time when buildings like this felt impossibly far away. 23 years earlier, her mother had cleaned office floors during overnight shifts in downtown Newark. Some nights, young Zariah would sit quietly in empty reception areas while waiting for her mother to finish work. She remembered the smell of floor polish, the hum of vending machines, and the way executives walked by without ever noticing the woman making their offices shine. Back then, she learned something powerful. People often notice titles before character, appearances before integrity, wealth before wisdom. The lesson stayed with her long after childhood ended. A cold breeze swept through the avenue as she adjusted the strap of her leather tote and crossed the street. There were no assistants walking beside her. No security detail. No luxury car waiting at the curb. Most people who passed her would have assumed she was an ordinary professional heading into an ordinary meeting. That was exactly how she preferred it. Success had never changed the way Zariah viewed herself. Over the last decade, she had quietly built one of the most respected community investment organizations in the country. Her firm funded minority-owned businesses, restored struggling neighborhoods, and helped small entrepreneurs gain access to opportunities larger institutions often ignored. Thousands of jobs existed because of projects she helped create. Yet very few people recognized her face. She liked it that way. Recognition attracted attention. Attention attracted noise. And noise often distracted people from the work that mattered. As she approached the entrance of Whitaker Holdings, Her phone vibrated softly. A message appeared from her chief financial officer. Everything is ready. Legal team confirmed the final documents. Zariah smiled faintly and slipped the phone back into her pocket. Today was supposed to be simple. A final signature. A strategic partnership. A project expected to bring investment into dozens of underserved communities across 3 states. Months of negotiations had led to this morning. Through the revolving doors, she could already see the elegant lobby beyond the glass. Sunlight reflected from polished stone. Employees moved confidently between elevators. Somewhere on the 42nd floor, senior executives were preparing for a meeting they believed would define the next chapter of their company. What none of them realized was how much depended on the woman now walking toward their front desk. Zariah pushed through the doors and entered the lobby. The warmth of the building replaced the October chill behind her. She glanced once toward the reception area and offered a polite smile. The woman behind the desk looked up. Their eyes met for only a second, but in that second something subtle changed. Something Zariah had experienced more times than she cared to count. A judgment. A conclusion. A decision made before a single word had been spoken. And although she did not know it yet, that brief glance was about to set an entire chain of events into motion. Madison Pierce had worked at Whitaker Holdings for 3 years, and in that time she had developed a reputation for spotting people who did not belong. At least that was what she told herself. Every morning she sat behind the curved reception desk beneath a wall of illuminated company logos, greeting investors, attorneys, consultants, and executives who passed through the lobby. She knew the names of important clients. She memorized faces that appeared in business magazines. She could recognize expensive watches from 20 feet away and identify luxury brands with a single glance. Over time, she had convinced herself that success looked a certain way. It arrived in tailored suits. It stepped out of black town cars. It carried confidence that announced itself before a word was spoken. The flaw in that belief was simple. Success did not always announce itself. Sometimes it walked through the front door carrying a weathered leather tote and wearing a coat purchased years ago because it was practical, not fashionable. As Zariah approached the reception desk, Madison's eyes moved quickly from her shoes to her coat and then to the tote resting against her shoulder. The entire evaluation took less than 5 seconds. 5 seconds to form an opinion. 5 seconds to decide who deserved respect and who did not. Behind her professional smile, Madison had already placed Zariah into a category. Not executive. Not investor. Not decision maker. Certainly not someone connected to a meeting scheduled on the 42nd floor. Nearby, a pair of junior analysts stepped out of an elevator laughing about a presentation. A courier crossed the lobby carrying sealed packages. The giant digital display behind the reception desk rotated through images of luxury developments and corporate achievements worth billions of dollars. Madison looked perfectly at home in the middle of it all. Zariah and her eyes did not. "Good morning," Zariah said warmly. "I am here for a scheduled meeting." Madison offered a polite smile that never reached her eyes. "Which department?" Her fingers rested on the keyboard, though she had not typed anything yet. "Executive Conference Suite," Zariah replied. "I am expected at 10 o'clock. Something flickered across Madison's face. Not confusion. Skepticism. The kind that appears when someone hears information they have already decided cannot be true. She glanced toward the elevators and then back toward Zariah. "Do you have an employee contact?" she asked. Zariah nodded. "Grant Whitaker." The answer should have changed everything. Instead, it changed nothing. Madison leaned back slightly in her chair. Around them, the lobby continued moving with the steady rhythm of corporate life. Phones rang softly. Elevator doors opened and closed. The scent of fresh coffee drifted from a nearby cafe. Yet beneath that calm surface, an invisible tension began to form. Madison studied Zariah again, searching for confirmation of the assumption she had already made. She found only composure. No nervousness. No frustration. No attempt to impress anyone. Strangely, that confidence irritated her. Most people challenged by reception either became defensive or embarrassed. Zariah did neither. She simply stood there with quiet patience, as if she knew something everyone else did not. Madison folded her hands together and made a decision. It was a small decision. A simple one. But before the morning was over, it would become the mistake she wished she could take back. Madison turned her monitor slightly and tapped a few keys without actually opening the executive calendar. The movement looked official enough to anyone watching. "I am sorry," she said after a moment, her voice carrying the polished confidence of someone who believed she controlled the room. "I do not see your name listed anywhere." Zariah remained calm. "Could you check under Brooks?" Madison pretended to search again. "Nothing." The answer came too quickly. Zariah noticed it. So did an older man sitting nearby with a briefcase balanced on his knee. But neither said anything. The lobby hummed with quiet activity around them. Shoes clicked across marble. Elevator doors opened with soft chimes. Sunlight reflected off glass walls and polished steel columns. Somewhere above, billions of dollars worth of decisions were being discussed behind conference room doors. Down here, another decision was being made. Madison leaned forward slightly. "Are you sure you are in the right building?" The question hung in the air. Not openly rude. Not openly hostile. Yet something beneath it felt sharp. Zariah offered a patient smile. "Yes, I am certain." Madison's expression tightened. "Perhaps your meeting was cancelled." "No one informed me of that." "Well," Madison replied, folding her arms, "people usually receive notice." The emphasis on the word people did not go unnoticed. A pair of analysts crossing the lobby slowed their pace. One exchanged a glance with the other before continuing toward the elevators. Zariah felt the familiar weight of being judged before being known. It was not new. She had encountered it in boardrooms, airports, restaurants, and hotels. Sometimes it appeared as suspicion, sometimes as dismissal, sometimes as forced politeness hiding something less pleasant underneath. Over the years she had learned an important lesson. You could not control another person's assumptions. You could only control your response. "Would you please contact Mr. Whitaker's office?" she asked gently. Madison let out a small sigh, the kind designed to suggest inconvenience. "Mr. Whitaker is extremely busy." "I understand. He is in a major executive meeting." "I understand that as well." Madison stared at her for several seconds. The calmness bothered her. Most people would have become frustrated by now. Most would have raised their voice or demanded attention. Zariah did neither. She simply waited. That patience felt almost like a challenge. Madison turned toward the security desk near the entrance. Two uniformed officers sat monitoring lobby cameras. "If you do not have a confirmed appointment, I cannot allow you to remain in the executive waiting area," Madison said. "There is seating available outside the building." The words caused several heads to turn. Even the courier near the revolving doors looked over briefly. Zariah glanced toward the row of leather chairs positioned beside the reception desk. "I am not asking for special treatment," she said quietly. "I am simply waiting for a scheduled meeting." Madison stood from her chair. The movement drew even more attention. "Ma'am, I have explained the situation." Her smile had disappeared entirely now. "You need to leave the lobby." For the first time, a visible silence settled over the room. Conversations faded. Keyboards paused. A few employees looked up from their phones. The morning's rhythm seemed to hesitate. Zariah looked at Madison for a long moment. Not with anger. Not with embarrassment. Almost with sadness. Then she nodded once. "All right," she said softly. "If that is your decision." What Madison did not realize was that 42 floors above them, a meeting was reaching the exact moment when one question was about to change everything. "Has Miss Brooks arrived yet?" Grant Whitaker asked. And suddenly, no one in the room had an answer. The silence lingered for a second after Zariah spoke. "That is your decision." There was no anger in her voice. No sarcasm. No attempt to embarrass anyone. Somehow that made the moment feel heavier. Madison had expected resistance. She had expected excuses or complaints. Instead, the woman simply accepted the judgment being placed upon her. Around the lobby, employees pretended not to watch while continuing to watch anyway. The older man with the briefcase lowered his newspaper. A young assistant standing near the elevators glanced toward the reception desk before quickly looking away. Nobody wanted to become involved. Corporate buildings had their own unwritten rules. People learned to avoid situations that looked uncomfortable. Zariah adjusted the strap of her tote and took a slow step away from the desk. The polished marble reflected the movement of her shoes beneath the bright morning light. Madison felt a small surge of satisfaction. Order had been restored. The situation was resolved. At least that was what she believed. Yet something about the way Zariah carried herself felt unusual. She did not walk like someone who had been defeated. She did not seem embarrassed. She did not rush toward the exit. Instead, she moved with the same quiet dignity she had shown from the moment she entered the building. That composure unsettled Madison more than she wanted to admit. At the security desk, one of the officers exchanged a glance with his colleague. Neither moved. Technically, there was no disturbance. There was only a woman leaving because she had been asked to leave. Nearby, a large digital clock displayed 9:56 a.m. 4 minutes until the meeting scheduled on the 42nd floor. 4 minutes until months of negotiations were supposed to reach their conclusion. Zariah paused briefly near the revolving doors. Through the glass she could see traffic moving along the avenue. Yellow taxis, delivery trucks, pedestrians carrying coffee cups against the cool autumn air. She took a slow breath. Her phone remained silent in her pocket. For a moment, she considered calling her office. She could explain what happened. She could ask someone to intervene. One phone call would solve everything. Yet she chose not to make it. Character revealed itself most clearly when nobody was watching. And integrity meant remaining true to yourself, even when others failed to show it. Behind her, Madison had already returned to her computer. She typed a few emails and answered a call as though nothing significant had happened. The lobby gradually returned to its normal rhythm. Conversations resumed. Elevators chimed. The scent of fresh coffee drifted through the air. Everything appeared normal. 42 floors above, however, normal had vanished. Grant Whitaker sat at the head of a conference table overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Sunlight spilled across floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. Attorneys, financial advisors, and senior executives filled the room. A thick stack of final contracts rested near his elbow. He glanced toward the empty chair reserved for one specific guest. "Has Miss Brooks arrived yet?" he asked again. This time the question carried more weight. Several executives looked toward one another. A legal director checked her tablet. An assistant reviewed messages on his phone. Nobody spoke immediately. The hesitation lasted only a few seconds, but Grant noticed it. His jaw tightened. "I asked a simple question." The room grew still. Finally, an assistant cleared his throat. "Sir, we assumed she was already in the building." Grant slowly sat forward. The city skyline shimmered beyond the glass behind him. Something cold settled into his chest. Because Zariah Brooks was never late. Not once in 7 years. And for the first time that morning, he began to suspect that something downstairs had gone terribly wrong. For a moment, the conference room remained perfectly still. The only sound came from the faint hum of climate control vents hidden behind polished walnut panels. Grant Whitaker looked around the table, waiting for someone to explain why the most important guest of the morning had not appeared. Nobody did. The legal director glanced at her tablet again. The chief financial officer checked his messages. An executive assistant hurriedly refreshed the building visitor log. Nothing. Grant stood slowly. The movement alone was enough to change the atmosphere in the room. People who worked with him knew the difference between concern and urgency. This was urgency. "Call reception," he said. An assistant immediately reached for a phone. The line connected within seconds. Down in the lobby, Madison answered with her usual polished tone. "Whitaker Holdings reception. How may I help you?" "This is Executive Conference Suite A," the assistant said. "Has Miss Brooks checked in?" Madison frowned. The name sounded familiar. Then she remembered the woman she had just sent away. A strange feeling touched the back of her mind, but she pushed it aside. "No," she replied. "No guest by that name has arrived." Upstairs, Grant's eyes narrowed. "Put it on speaker." The assistant obeyed. Madison's voice filled the room. "Reception speaking." "Madison," Grant said. The moment she heard his voice, she sat up straighter. "Good morning, sir. I need a simple answer. Has Miss Zariah Brooks arrived at this building?" Madison hesitated. Only briefly. But it was enough. Grant noticed. So did everyone else. Sir, there was a woman earlier claiming she had an executive meeting. The room seemed to lose its air. Grant's face changed instantly. Claiming, he repeated. Yes, sir. She was unable to verify her appointment. Grant stared at the conference table. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Through the windows behind him, Manhattan stretched for miles beneath a clear autumn sky. Yet his attention was no longer on the city. It was on one terrifying possibility. Describe her. Madison swallowed. African-American woman. Dark blue coat. Leather tote bag. A long silence followed. The kind of silence that made people uncomfortable. The kind that felt dangerous. Then Grant closed his eyes for 1 second. Just one. When he opened them again, every executive at the table could see the alarm in them. Where is she now? Madison looked toward the revolving doors. The woman was still visible near the entrance, standing quietly beside the glass, looking out at the avenue beyond. She is leaving, sir. The words hit the room like a dropped weight. Grant grabbed his phone and pushed back his chair. Do not let her leave. He was already moving before anyone responded. Papers remained scattered across the table. Contract folders lay open. Half-finished coffees sat abandoned. The meeting no longer mattered. Not compared to this. Behind him, executives exchanged stunned looks as Grant crossed the room at a speed nobody expected from a man who normally carried himself with measured control. The elevator doors opened almost immediately. He stepped inside and pressed the lobby button. The descent felt impossibly slow. 20 seconds. 18. 15. Each floor indicator seemed to crawl downward. Meanwhile, in the lobby, Zariah stood quietly near the sunlight pouring through the glass walls. The avenue outside glowed beneath the late morning light. Traffic flowed steadily. People hurried along the sidewalks. She rested one hand against her tote and took another calm breath. The disappointment was real, but she refused to let it harden her heart. Across the room, Madison watched her from behind the reception desk. For the first time all morning, uncertainty had begun to replace confidence. Then a soft chime echoed through the lobby. The executive elevator had arrived. And the moment the doors opened, everything changed. The executive elevator doors slid open with a soft metallic whisper. Every conversation in the lobby seemed to stop at once. Grant Whitaker stepped out so quickly that several employees instinctively moved aside. His dark suit jacket swung behind him as he crossed the marble floor, his eyes scanning the room with unmistakable urgency. Madison had never seen him move like that. Neither had most people in the building. Normally, Grant carried himself with measured confidence, the calm authority of a man accustomed to controlling every room he entered. This was different. This looked like panic. Miss Brooks, he called. The sound echoed across the lobby. Zariah turned slowly from the glass entrance. For a brief second, relief crossed Grant's face. Relief so obvious that even strangers noticed it. He walked directly toward her. Not toward a major investor in a tailored suit. Not toward a celebrity client. Toward the woman who had been standing alone by the doors. Zariah, he said, slightly out of breath. Thank goodness you are still here. Around them employees froze. The older man with the newspaper lowered it completely. Two analysts exiting an elevator stopped in mid-conversation. Even the security officers stared openly now. Zariah offered a polite smile. Good morning, Grant. The familiarity of the greeting seemed to drain the remaining color from Madison's face. Grant glanced toward the reception desk and then back toward Zariah. Were you waiting long? The question sounded simple. Yet something behind it suggested he already feared the answer. Zariah hesitated. She could have exposed everything immediately. She could have pointed toward the desk and explained exactly what happened. Instead, she answered honestly. Long enough. Grant's expression tightened. The words landed harder than an accusation would have. He slowly turned toward Madison. The entire lobby seemed to hold its breath. Madison stood from her chair so quickly that it nearly rolled backward. Sir, Grant raised a hand. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just enough to stop her. Then he asked a single question. Did you ask Ms. Brooks to leave? Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe. Madison opened her mouth but found no words. The silence answered for her. Grant looked back at Zariah for a moment. A look of disappointment crossed his face, though it was not directed at her. It was directed at the situation itself. Directed at the fact that someone who had spent years transforming communities and creating opportunities for thousands of families had just been treated as though she did not belong. When he spoke again, his voice carried through the entire lobby. "Do you have any idea who she is?" Madison stared at him. The question felt larger than a request for information. It sounded like a challenge to every assumption she had made that morning. Grant stepped slightly to the side and gestured toward Zariah. "This is Zariah Brooks." He paused. Every eye in the building seemed fixed on him. The founder of Brooks Community Capital. A murmur moved through the crowd. Some employees recognized the name immediately. Others did not. Grant continued. "She is the reason our largest redevelopment partnership exists. She is the reason this company is about to invest in projects that will create thousands of jobs across 3 states. Madison felt her stomach drop. Grant's next words landed even harder. "And she is the most important client in this building today." The lobby fell completely silent. No phones. No conversations. No footsteps. Just silence. The kind that arrives when the truth finally enters the room and leaves nowhere for assumptions to hide. Nobody spoke for several long seconds. The lobby that had felt so busy only moments earlier now seemed frozen beneath the morning sunlight pouring through the glass walls. Madison stood behind the reception desk, her hands gripping the edge of the counter as reality settled over her piece by piece. The name, the company, the partnership, the significance of the woman she had dismissed. Every assumption she had made during those first 5 seconds now felt unbearable. Grant Whitaker looked around the lobby and seemed to notice the stunned faces surrounding them. Then he turned back toward Zariah. His expression softened immediately. "I owe you an apology," he said. "You should never have been treated this way in this building." Zariah met his eyes calmly. There was disappointment there, certainly, but not bitterness. Not anger. Not triumph. The absence of those emotions somehow made the moment even more powerful. Grant shook his head. "You have spent years helping communities that most companies overlooked. You have given opportunities to people who were told they did not matter. And today, after everything you have accomplished, you walked into my headquarters and were made to feel unwelcome." The words echoed across the silent lobby. Madison lowered her gaze. She wished she could disappear. Every employee watching understood exactly what had happened now. It was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a lesson unfolding in real time. Zariah glanced toward the sunlight shining across the marble floor before looking back at Grant. "The truth is," she said softly, "this is not the first time something like this has happened." Grant's face tightened. Several employees exchanged uncomfortable looks. Zariah continued. "When people decide who you are before they learn your name, situations like this become familiar." The honesty in her voice carried more weight than any accusation. Nobody could dismiss it. Nobody could argue with it. Madison finally stepped away from the desk. Her confidence had vanished completely. "Ms. Brooks," she said quietly. Her voice trembled. "I am sorry." The lobby remained silent. Zariah turned toward her. Madison looked younger suddenly, less certain, less guarded. "I made assumptions," she admitted. "I thought I understood who you were before I even spoke to you. I was wrong." The words were difficult for her to say. Everyone could see that. Yet she forced herself to continue. "There is no excuse for it." Zariah studied her for a moment. The sunlight reflected softly from the glass walls behind them, casting long patterns across the floor. Somewhere outside, traffic continued moving through Manhattan as though nothing extraordinary was happening. But inside the building, something important had changed. Character was being revealed. Not through success. Not through power. Through accountability. Grant remained silent, allowing the moment to belong to them. Madison swallowed hard. "I understand if you do not forgive me." A faint smile appeared on Zariah's face. Not because the situation was amusing, because she recognized something many people never learned. Growth often begins with humility. "Forgiveness is not the difficult part," she replied gently. "The difficult part is making sure we do not repeat the same mistake with the next person." Madison lowered her eyes again. The words landed softly, yet their impact was undeniable. Around the lobby, employees listened carefully. Some would remember that sentence for years. Grant exhaled slowly. For the first time since reaching the lobby, some of the tension left his shoulders. He looked toward the executive elevators and then back toward Zariah. The entire leadership team is waiting for you upstairs. Zariah smiled. Then we should not keep them waiting any longer. And as they turned toward the elevators together, the atmosphere in the building felt different than before. Lighter. Quieter. As though truth had finally replaced assumption, and everyone present knew they had just witnessed something far more valuable than a business meeting. An hour later, the final signatures were complete. The contracts that had occupied months of negotiations now rested neatly inside leather folders on a polished conference table 42 floors above Manhattan. Through the wall of glass behind them, the city stretched beneath a brilliant afternoon sky, its buildings glowing beneath streams of sunlight. Executives shook hands. Attorneys exchanged relieved smiles. Financial analysts quietly celebrated projections that promised opportunity for thousands of families across 3 states. Yet the most memorable part of the day had nothing to do with contracts, numbers, or business strategy. As the meeting ended, Grant Whitaker walked with Zariah toward the elevators. Neither spoke for a few moments. The silence felt comfortable, earned. When the elevator doors opened, they stepped inside together and descended toward the lobby. Floor after floor passed beneath them. The city skyline slowly disappeared from view. When the doors opened again, the lobby looked much as it had earlier that morning. Employees moved through the space. Visitors checked messages. Sunlight still poured through the towering windows. Yet something subtle had changed. People seemed more aware of one another. More thoughtful. Near the reception desk, Madison stood waiting. She had remained at her station all afternoon. Not because anyone ordered her to stay. Because she understood that some lessons deserved reflection. When she saw Zariah approach, she straightened immediately. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Madison offered a small, sincere smile. It was different from the practiced smile she wore that morning. This one carried humility. "Thank you," Madison said quietly. Zariah tilted her head slightly. "For what?" Madison glanced around the lobby before answering. "For giving me the opportunity to learn from my mistake, instead of becoming defined by it." The words were simple. Honest. Zariah nodded. "Then make it count." Madison smiled again, and this time the expression reached her eyes. Grant watched the exchange without interrupting. He understood that no executive policy, training seminar, or corporate statement could have created a lesson as powerful as the one everyone in the building had witnessed today. Some truths had to be experienced before they could be understood. Near the entrance, the revolving doors turned slowly as people came and went beneath the afternoon sun. Zariah adjusted the strap of her leather tote and prepared to leave. Grant extended his hand. She shook it warmly. "Thank you for staying," he said. "Thank you for listening," she replied. Then she turned and walked toward the glass doors. The marble floor reflected soft light beneath her feet. Her pace remained steady, calm, unhurried. She did not look back. She did not need to. Behind her, conversations gradually resumed. Phones rang. Elevators chimed. The city continued moving forward. Yet for many people in that building, the day would not be forgotten. Not because of the size of the partnership. Not because of the money involved. Because a woman had been judged before she was known, and had responded with dignity instead of resentment. Outside, a cool autumn breeze greeted Zariah as she stepped onto the sidewalk. Yellow taxis moved through the avenue. Leaves drifted along the curb. The sunlight felt warmer now. She paused briefly and looked up at the tower behind her. Hundreds of windows reflected the afternoon sky like mirrors. Then she smiled softly and continued down the street. Far above, sunlight shimmered across the glass facade. Inside, people returned to their work. But somewhere in the quiet space between assumption and understanding, something had changed. And in that change lived a kind of justice that required no applause, no headlines, and no revenge. Only the simple recognition that every person deserves to be seen before they are judged. The wind carried a few golden leaves across the sidewalk as Zariah disappeared into the crowd, and the city swallowed the moment whole, leaving behind only its lesson and the silence that followed.